Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Manhattan Community Board 4's Executive Committee meeting for the month of February. My name is Jeffrey LaFrancois, Chair of the Board. Happy to call this meeting together tonight, which is taking place on the squares, virtually by order of the mayor, who has once again extended the executive order through March 21st, I believe. So accordingly, we will continue to meet here unless we receive direction otherwise from the borough president. This evening we have a lengthy agenda. We'll take the items up top. First, a couple of votes, quite a few discussions. So do want to dive right in. And item one, a letter to EDC about Pier 94. We learned this past month that negotiations that were set to expire back at the end of January have since been extended. The city referred to the negotiations as difficult. I take that as frankly a very good sign. And I wanted to use that opportunity to remind the city of our position. We've also included Deputy Mayor Maria Torres Springer on the correspondence. City planning reports to her office, and so we felt it appropriate to be sure that she is aware of our position given the ongoing status of these negotiations. That letter was drafted in advance for your review. I'm looking for a vote to send it immediately, and the full board would ratify next week. Are there any questions on the Pier 94 letter? Excellent. I'll take a motion to adopt that letter, please.
Motion.
Christine, is there a second?
Second.
JD. Any objections? Present, not eligible? Abstentions? Excellent. Thank you, everybody. That letter passes unanimously. Hopefully one day we'll be able to stop talking about Pier 94, but in the meantime. Item two, letter to the Independent Redistricting Commission regarding the State Assembly redistricting lines. For some context here, we've sent two prior letters on this, one about City Council redistricting and one about State Senate and Assembly redistricting. Basically, this is just going to be a rehash of the letter we sent regarding the Senate and Assembly lines back in 2021, but I'm going to strike all the references to the Senate lines and make it just about the Assembly. The letter, again, we worked hard to frame it so it's very much not political and all about keeping our district cohesive. That Assembly districts should be cohesive to community district lines. Christine and then Bert.
Yeah, clarification. I missed that installment of the series, but why is it happening now again?
Yep, so there was a lawsuit filed by the minority leader in the Assembly to request that the lines in the Assembly be redrawn. And so last time that didn't happen, you know, that the Senate lines were thrown out in the last cycle and a judge sent those back. This time the commission is redrawing the lines and hopefully it doesn't work its way through the courts again, but that's the status of this. And so we're just taking up the Assembly lines right now. Bert?
Christine had my question and you answered it. Thank you.
Jessica?
Yeah, sorry, can you just repeat what you said? Are you saying you're striking the references to the Senate version? So the first two paragraphs on page 2? Or did
Pretty
I
much. I'm going to make it sort of more appropriate just for the Assembly, but still work to have us be a, Paul, what's the word, the phrase I'm looking for, the communities of commonality or something.
Communities of interest.
Communities of interest, that's it. And frame it through that lens. So really strike all references to the Senate. The Senate lines, by the way, were much more offensive than the Assembly lines. And really, they're not terrible right now. So the new lines.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? These are due March 7th, so I'm looking for a vote and the board will take this up in standard course based on this. So if there's no more questions, I'll take a motion to adopt that letter.
So moved.
Thanks, Paul. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Carrie. Any objections? Present, not eligible? Abstentions? Excellent. Thank you, everybody. The joint letter for Public Bathroom Task Force proposed text amendments coming from our land use committees. I give it over to our land use committees, and I'm not sure who's sort of giving the summary of this letter this evening.
Paul can do it. Yeah.
Paul, Mr. Devlin.
Excellent, thanks.
I love how quickly everybody was like, Paul, it's yours.
We send him the shitty topic.
Good one.
There's been a call for a lot more public restrooms across the city. In 2021, a public restrooms working group was formed. They looked at a variety of different options available to create more public restrooms in our city. One option is to require in the POPs, the publicly owned private spaces that are given away as usually as zoning bonuses. Right now, if a POPs has over 10,000 square feet, there's a requirement for a food kiosk or a cafe of some sort. The working group is recommending that we add public restrooms to the requirement for POPs. And so there's been a lot of discussion about what that means, how they'd be instituted, who would maintain them, who would clean them, what are the thresholds for determining whether or not this happens, whether POPs, when they come in for recertification, would then be required to add, like the old POPs would be required to add bathrooms or restrooms to these facilities. It is a working group that consists of 5 community boards across Manhattan and Queens. So there's, again, we often face issues that a citywide zoning text amendment doesn't always necessarily address specific concerns of the areas. So the 2 land use committees each met to raise the points of what would be of concern to people in our district. And we've requested that working group incorporate our concerns into any zoning text amendment language to make sure that our issues are addressed and raised. The letter in the Dropbox goes through a little bit more history of what this working group has accomplished. It also lists all of the concerns that were raised at both land use committees. Because it's a joint letter, it would technically come from executive committee. It doesn't come from the individual committees. It would be a letter sent to full board as coming through this committee. So I can talk for a little while longer, but I'll stop and see if anybody has any questions. If anybody saw the letter, there might be issues in there that you want to raise. Any questions, Katie?
Just a quick question. In line, I think it's 45. I have to get back to it here for a second. It says only 14 of 550 POPs currently have public restrooms, and only 1 is in CD4. Is that 550 POPs? Is that only those that are over 10,000 feet, or is that all POPs? I'm just trying to get a sense of what the magnitude is here. I believe it's all POPs. Okay, and because I don't. And then the question that was asked that we didn't have the answer to, Katie, that's an interesting point, is if this zoning text amendment passes, then how many new public restrooms would be created as a result of that? And the working group didn't have an answer to that question. Oh, interesting. Yeah, and one of the thoughts that we had is to recommend that occupancy load of the plaza or the POPs should drive the determination about a public restroom, not just the square footage. So if there's a POP that has 5,000 square feet, right now the language is if you have 10,000 square feet, you have a food kiosk or cafe. So thinking add a restroom to that 10,000 square foot POPs. However, if something is 5,000 square feet, is there any reason we can't add a public restroom, even though there isn't a requirement for a food kiosk? Mm-hmm. So one of our thoughts is to maybe incorporate that into the zoning text amendment. But the other issue is sometimes POPs could have a lot of foot traffic. There could be in a high dense area, and it could be very small. So, okay. So, sorry. So if something's small but has a high usage of people, could that trigger instead a requirement for a public restroom? So rather than determining it by a square footage, determined by occupancy load. Mm-hmm. I do think just being able to frame somehow, like, is all of this effort being gone to, and then it's still not actually going to get us very many public bathrooms, like if somehow being able to figure out that answer would be great. Yeah, it was a question we raised and we did not get an answer. Okay.
And again, this is a letter to recommend to the working group that they incorporate as many of our considerations into the zoning text amendment before it comes back to us for final approval or review.
Bobby?
So I did have a question. Katie made me, and then your answer, Paul, made me wonder if this was meant to be applied retroactively to POPs that have already been approved but are above 10,000 feet, or sorry, 10,000 square feet.
Yeah, that's a great question, because what they call it is recertification. Every 3 years, a POPs has to come in to be recertified. And some of the language in our letter dictates that anybody over 10,000 square feet coming in for recertification would now be required to add a public restroom in some form. So it would affect retroactively created POPs, yes, is what we're suggesting they do. But it wasn't written that way in the first place, but we have asked for that to be added.
I know that makes a lot of sense. And are there questions about hours or recommendations about hours? I know that there are hours, I believe recommendations about hours specifically relating to POPs, but is the recommendation bathrooms would be similar or something different?
The hours themselves, each POPs might have, so there are certain POPs that might close in the evenings because they are, commercial office buildings or something like that, so they may not be open 24/7. We did have multiple conversations about asking for 24/7 access. We also included in our letter language that says identification is not required to go into a public restroom at a POPs, because there are some, if you think about some of the POPs are interior, right? You might have an office building and the lobby level is technically a POPs. So somebody has to go inside the building and then they have to go into the bathroom, right? So making sure that people don't get asked for identification as they enter the building or enter the restroom, and that there are no barriers to entry in that sense. But if the office building closes, that POPs is closed, there's limited access from that point.
Okay, that's cool. And then I have the last question is, are there instances in which this just doesn't make sense? Like this isn't feasible? None that I can think of, but I am curious if you ran into that in the working group.
Yeah, and I think that if you look in the letter too, you'll see that there are different opportunities for creating public restrooms. It could be within the building, it could be a new facility, it could be a converted space. So we're trying to offer as many opportunities as possible for that. But sure, there could be a situation where putting in a public restroom into a POPs may not work. But I'd rather write language that says it's required than to come up with every caveat for them.
Helpful, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Roberta. Marty?
I know you sort of answered this before. Is there any process going on that will determine how many, that will let us know how many restrooms are involved in this? I know you said we don't know, we got the answer, I don't know, but I think that's something that we should press. I mean, if it's only one matters, I guess. If it's only one restroom in our district, that's an achievement, but we need more than that. So I'd like to push on that issue.
Well, and Marty, I agree with that. The notion is that the newly created POPs, right, they typically do come from a zoning bonus of some sort. So what this also has done for us as a community board has raised this awareness. So when somebody does come in making a request of some sort for development, even if this zoning text amendment doesn't pass, now we've raised the consciousness of the need for public restrooms so we can add them in. But to say this account, we don't know how many new developers will come in with new sites to request bonuses in the zoning such that a POPs would be created, such that a public restroom would be created. So it is very challenging to forecast. And keep in mind, there are other alternatives being pursued for public restrooms, right? There's efforts to work with the Parks Department and playgrounds to create more facilities. There's efforts to maybe provide better access at libraries and police stations and public schools. So there are other avenues being pursued. This is just one of those avenues.
That's all good, but we don't even know how many 10,000 square feet or more POPs there are in our district, because that would be a number that retroactively would eventually have restrooms. Or am I reading it wrong?
No, that's a good point.
Paul, we do know how many more than 10,000 feet are in our district.
Was that in the presentation, Jessica?
Yeah, I think there's only,
There's not many,
is it
right?
4 or
Yeah.
5, but only one has a bathroom.
That sounds about right.
So I
Jessica,
think if each one was required to have one, that would be 4 or 5 more restrooms, and maybe they would be required to have more than one.
Like we have a Pops in Hell's Kitchen at 57th Street with a food kiosk there. And that food kiosk, hasn't really been functioning for a while. But when they come in for recertification, that would be the opportunity to install, maybe ask for one there.
For those
Even
of
if-
us that need restrooms periodically, and 4 or 5 in our district with proper signage would be an amazing advance.
Listen, I'm at the age where I go at intermission whether I need to go or not.
A wise person pees when they can, a dumb
All
person
right.
pees when they have to.
All right.
Any other questions on the letter?
Any other questions? Thank you, Paul. Thank you to both committees for taking this up. Also a good exercise in knowing what POPs are and that we don't have that many of them in our district.
There were some from the Dropbox. There were some edits sent to me from various members. I will incorporate those edits before the letter goes to Dropbox for full board, but it's just grammatical stuff.
Is the platform at Worldwide Plaza a POP?
Yes,
Yes.
that's the one.
That's the second one, therefore, in Hell's Kitchen.
And then
I think that's the one.
What do you mean,
That's
the
the only
one
one-
which has a bathroom, you mean?
Yes.
Oh,
Which, by the way, Christine, I never knew there was a public restroom there because
It's
the
hard to
signage
find.
is so lousy, and it's inside the arcade area.
Yep.
And it's very challenging to find.
Yep.
Thank you all.
Okay, thank you to the land use committees. Could I have
I
a
have
motion?
one more.
Go
I'm
ahead,
so
Christine.
sorry,
No,
I
it's
didn't
fine.
read the whole thing. Does it talk about ADA accessibility somewhere?
Yes, there's a lot of issues in there: ADA, accessibility, maintenance, gender neutrality, lots of various.
All right,
language in
sorry,
there.
I didn't read the whole thing.
Yep.
The
Yeah,
last
the
comment,
working group is really pushing for all those issues.
the last comment you made about not knowing where they are is telling, and the fact that the letter contains language about signage, I think is seriously important also. So that one that you didn't know where it was should be well marked.
Exactly.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everybody. I'll take a motion to adopt this letter, please.
So moved.
Thank you, Carrie. Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks, Roberta. Any objections? Present, not eligible? Abstentions? Excellent. The motion, the letter passes. Thank you, everybody. Where did my agenda go? Man, this agenda is just cooking along. Now it's going to slow down. I circulated last week basically just a summary memo to provide some education, some direction, some background on the Western Rail Yards, which is a vast swath in our district on the west side that for many years was talked about at length on this board. Many of you on this committee actually were on the board then and drove through significant land use hearings. I think JT might have a little PTSD as I bring some of this up. I also want to acknowledge that both of the discussions on this topic, the zoning that exists for Western Rail Yards and any discussion about Madison Square Garden belongs in our land use committee. However, I wanted to put it on the agenda tonight for a couple of reasons. To begin the conversation on the topic of this, it's been in the press a lot lately. Our colleagues in CB5 are holding the first public hearing this evening, their land use committee, regarding the ULURP and new permit for Madison Square Garden. This last came up in 2014. I'm conflating the topics here, but I just wanted to sort of tee it up from the fact that yes, this will end up in a land use committee, but I wanted to start the discussion here this evening. That memo gave you some background, it provided some links, shared some details. Our community has, I think, a pretty serious expectation of what we know to be going on the Western Rail Yards. It is a significant amount of housing. It is a public school, and a whole lot of very much needed green space in that area, different than the green space that we got on what is referred to on the Eastern Rail Yards, which is really just a plaza and a driveway for related executives to drive through when needed. Recently, the council member expressed interest in potentially moving Madison Square Garden to the Western Rail Yards. There have been many different proposals about where MSG might move, were it to move. I would note that not only does MSG own its own self, but it owns the land below Penn Station as well. It'd be a complicated and lengthy process for that to happen. Of course, while all this is going on, there's the discussions around Penn Station. And actually, just as an update with you all, I was at a breakfast this morning with Catherine Garcia, the State Director of Operations, who sort of referred to the GPP in the past tense, which I thought was very interesting. And she noted, however, the governor is committed to a Penn Station renovation and that they put forth the GPP as a way they might pay for that, but acknowledge that it's very much dissolved, given that that whole plan is tied to a private developer who makes their determinations based on the market. So I really sort of throw this out for discussion, just on folks thinking about, while Western Rail Yards is yet to be realized in any way, shape, or form. There's a platform that's got to be built. Obviously, the topic of MSG and its location, I think, is a lot. I think there might be consensus that we'd like it moved, but we don't know where at this point in time. And so I just sort of want to open the discussion this evening. And it's perfect that JD is his first hand up, and I want to pass it over to him. Thank you, JD.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Just a clarification, perhaps from you or Jesse. If MSG comes before the Land Use Committee in, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it will be primarily or entirely about renewing the permit, correct?
Correct. So it's a ULURP. They have to go through the Department of City Planning, and I'm going to nuance your language, JD, if you'll indulge me.
Sure.
It's technically not a renewal. And I think it's very important to state that it's a new permit because new things can come out of it. So there's both the permit that's being issued and a text amendment the city is pursuing as well. Our understanding is that MSG won't be coming to CB4, and we'd really have to beg DCP if they wanted to, because it's not within our boundaries.
Thanks, Jeffrey. I thought they would be required to come because 8th Avenue, the other side of 8th Avenue, there's some stuff going on there. So perhaps you're right. But if they do, it will not be about moving MSG. It would be primarily about the new permit. Thank you.
That is exactly correct. The MSG discussion has sort of bubbled up in a wider way because of all the other things that are being talked about. Jesse, anything to add on that in terms of what you're understanding from DCP right now?
Yeah, we're in conversations with DCP. I forwarded you some materials today, land use co-chairs and leadership. I actually also dropped it in the Dropbox. There's a very brief presentation by DCP in the Dropbox as to they're simultaneously to MSG's application for the special permit. DCP and the city are also making amendments and proposing amendments. So that's going on at the same time. And so I find it a little confusing, but CB5 is holding their meeting tonight. And so we certainly can review it tomorrow. Or maybe when we get off this meeting, it'll still be happening. Who knows? So, but yeah, that's what I know. So I would like DCP at least to come and be able to speak. I don't know if it'll be in a public setting, but be able to give us at least a briefing. And I can't speak for MSG at this point.
Paul?
2 things. One is on the materials you sent over earlier, Jesse, I scanned them and it seems like Christine and Jeffrey, it seems more like public realm task force stuff from the Penn Station working group rather than specifically a land use application coming before one of our committees. So I don't know if the public realm task force can get their noses stuck into this as well. At least based on my scanning of those materials, it looked like a lot of it had to just do with public realm. But the more important point I want to make is that I think, and we've had these kind of conversations, is that I think what we as a board need to do is recognize that the zoning that we have in place for Hudson Yards calls for housing, schools, green space. And that if Madison Square Garden or any entertainment center, whether it's a sports arena or a casino, wants to be put into that space, we should not sacrifice one single unit of housing. And if anybody who's proposing putting something into the Western Rail Yards and is going to try to rezone that land to put in an entertainment center, I think we have to really stand firm that we are in a housing crisis and there is a plan in place for more housing units, and we need those housing units more than we need anything else right now. And I think we just need to kind of come out in front of it, because the council member is standing up saying, put it in there. CB5 is saying, let's get rid of it, let's move it from Penn Station and put it something else. And on their list is the Western Rail Yards. But I don't think people understand what I wasn't a part of it, but Joe and JD and you guys were all parts of this. Is like what we went through to get that land rezoned to accommodate housing and not accommodate a sports arena that was proposed before then. So, I'd like to see us kind of come out in front of this a little bit more. And that's my thoughts on that.
Thanks, Paul. Bert?
Yeah, I like that expression, come out in front of it more. I think it's very important. People forget. People don't remember. People ignore. People walk by, oh, look at that empty space over there. They have no knowledge. It almost, I don't know what a generation, what the number for a generation is, but 2009, 2010, 2012, it's not quite a generation, but it's a long time ago. We have to keep emphasizing as loud as we can in whatever methods of communication are available to us, that hold on, everybody. We have commitments. We worked on a rezoning, and that rezoning includes X amount of housing units, a little bit of commercial, a high school, a public school, and people say, what are you talking about? Yes, this is what the commitment is. This is what the zoning is. And I'll use the phrase, JD, that you objected to the last time we had some kind of discussion, that this is our opening negotiating position, because the way I see it, the forces, whatever the hell those forces are beginning to come together and say, I remember the days when an alternate space was the railroad yards in Long Island City, Sunnyside, for Madison Square Garden. Well, no one mentions that anymore. No one mentions that anymore. They're going to mention a new space for Madison Square Garden. It's the Hudson Yards. And just look at our city council member. He didn't say it must go there, but he threw that out as a viable possibility with no thought to consequences, as if it's an empty lot, a huge lot, but it's empty and with no purpose. And whoever the realtors are out there, I forget, is that for Ornado or Related, whoever it was? I remember 3 chairs ago, when at the very end of when I was chair, they came to us just throwing out the possibility, well, who knows what was going on in 2019, Maybe we don't need all those residential towers. Let's take a look and walk through. Maybe we could have another commercial. Okay, but that was the last conversation I heard about this. But the way it is now, the forces are aligning to move Madison Square Garden, and that's quote unquote the logical place for it to go. And we have to shout and shout and shout. Hold on, we have commitments and we don't want to give any of that up.
Thank you, Bert. Joe?
Sorry. So just want to remind everybody that the idea of moving MSG was going to the Farley post office at one point. And when we looked at that proposal, to make it fit, it had to be on an elliptical garden on an angle, because the garden needs to fill 2 blocks. So just keep that in mind in this whole discussion. This is never a 1-block discussion. So Bert is right. We have both the points of agreement, but we have the zoning in place that requires things that are very unique. Like you can't build a certain building unless you build a 650-seat school. You can't get the C of O for that building. It actually says it in the zoning kind of stuff. So I think the general idea, as Jeffrey noted, of having the garden move somewhere, this is something we should never dismiss out of hand because we want a better Penn Station. But I think the floating of ideas, both by the group, what's the Penn Station group, Jeffrey, that wants stuff?
Rethink.
Yeah. The Rethink group, right? They just said, without thinking, put it in our district, right? So that's crazy. The other part we should remember in this discussion, let's not get too head up about it. The Dolans are simply not going to move their $1 billion investment without major government relief on taxes or subsidy. So I think we should just give ourselves comfort with that. This is more the public discussion. And that is, I think we can easily say that we would support the garden relocating somewhere within the city or somewhere in another location, just say it, right? And the special permit language, Jesse and I had a long conversation about it. It's not uncommon that the city of New York will change zoning text around a special permit in order to achieve something. And from the little bit I've been able to understand, they're changing this text as a way, and they're putting public realm language in, Paul, as a way to have those be conditions of the new grant of the modified special permit. So I don't even think the city of New York is talking about moving the garden. They want to achieve things like maybe getting rid of the Hulu Theater, or, more open space around it, making the thing function better. And so therefore, Paul, it is actually, the Public Realm Task Force could comment, but it is a land use matter because it's a special permit at the end of the day, which is a zoning matter. And I don't know, I talked to Jeffrey earlier today. It's odd that DCP would not come and just talk about it at all. Normally things that are on the boundary, they always bring it to the adjacent community board because the environmental impact stuff goes into the adjacent community board. So at least we should be briefed on it, if not have a public meeting about it. But I think we should not worry so much, this is coming to the Western Rail Yards, but having some sort of upfront thing, Bert, to saying the Western Rail Yards has a zoning which includes A, B, C, and D, and the garden can only fit if it's on 2 full blocks, and that would make A, B, C, and D impossible. So therefore, if you want to move it, let's talk about moving it and have a public discussion about it, but not at this location. Just something simple as that might be the way to go.
Thanks, Joe. Christine?
Yeah, I totally agree with Joe. I was just reading in an article that it would take $8 billion of state money to buy Madison Square Garden out of their location and relocate them. $8 billion is a very big number. And so the fact that it's only on on 2 blocks, I mean, I don't know whether the marshalling yards would be a candidate. It could take 1 street and that. It may be something that we could throw out there, no, whatever. I just, finally on the text amendment being on the Public Realms Task Force, I think this needs to be amended for a number of items that need to be done in order to make it feasible to do the task force. It doesn't talk about micromobility. And then it talks about MTA, where really the task force should be the one that says it's good or not for the environment. I mean, MTA is really working on underground. So we need to add a whole lot of substance here to make it work. But I agree with what Joe said, essentially.
Thanks, Christine. Alan?
Thank you. So for those of us who were there but don't recall, and for those of us who weren't there, since this is state property, how much input do we really have in making or preventing changes, and how much does the state have in terms of changing zoning and maybe agreeing to move the either putting a casino there or putting MSG in there? Because I recall the conversations about the only thing we had really control over was that small segment of the shed with a little bit of outdoor space, but everything else was pretty much done without much input from CB4 because it was all state property. So maybe we can just.
Alan, the Western Rail Yards closed, meaning Related purchased it from the MTA. That closing happened in 2013 or something. And that's the reason we kicked off the RFPs for the MTA and DEP sites. They were part of the commitments. That is no longer state property and hasn't been so since the middle of last decade.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's cool. Thank you.
Yep. Leslie?
Hi, guys. Just so you know, I'm not two of us. I'm not voting twice here. I promise. I have a audio issue with my computer, so I'm on my phone on the other one. But I want to thank Bert because I thought what he said was exactly on point. Everything, every line, I agree with Bert 100%. I do have a question though for Jeffrey before my comment. After the council members' statements, are we preparing any formal comment on his comments, any formal response or reaction, or are we not? What was the initial thoughts?
I mean, look, I don't want to say we were forced into the discussion because we knew that the ULURP was coming for the special permit. I don't want to say that, like, I don't want to get into a spitting match with the council member, frankly, on it, but to a certain extent, right? He said something, it was in the press, it ruffled a lot of feathers. And so how we're sort of framing this, does a letter come out of it specifically to him saying, we welcome a wider discussion about a relocation of MSG, but our understanding is this is what's happening on the Western Rail Yards? Maybe. I'll be honest in that I kind of just wanted to have an open discussion on it tonight to hear folks' ideas and thoughts on it, especially like how it ties into all the work that Christine, Paul, and I have been doing on the Penn Station task force stuff. So I think that part of this is to have the discussion to drive us to one of those points, Leslie, at the end. I don't think that there's a necessarily a wrong step that we can take at this point.
All right, fair enough. So the first thing I thought of when I heard those comments or saw the comments, I guess, on social media was funny. And I talked to Paul about this and Joe offline. It wasn't necessarily MSG. I think we all kind of know, and what people have said, I think moving MSG to that western part is pretty much not an improbability, almost an impossibility. But what triggered in my mind was when the council members said that, it was chiseling a little bit at the fact that that was a space that could be quote unquote redesigned, redeveloped, and a possible casino discussion was opening up. I'm not saying that's what he meant, but it did trigger in my mind if he's saying, hey, listen, MSG could go there and that would be a great idea. Listen, is it going to go there? Probably not. But in his mind, that area is up for, I don't want to say is thrown up for discussion, but then if MSG doesn't work, they might go back to him and say, hey, listen, you mentioned this for MSG. That's also a casino application. If you were willing to bend with MSG, can we bend with a casino? Listen, maybe I'm connecting too many dots, but I just don't like doors that are open like that, even little cracks. So I didn't know, that's why I asked my first question, because I didn't know what, and I liked what Paul said about getting in front of it, and then what Bert said. So I didn't know if we should get in front of it, knowing that that casino thing is down the line. But thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. Dale?
Yes, okay. And I understand the constraint. I agree with Bert on his impassioned plea, but I understand the constraints that the Dolans squatting on that say, or they're not squatting, but you know what they represent to this process. But I just want to make everybody aware that there was a transportation engineer who we have seen at our committees. We've invited him to our committees to look at the transit alternatives beneath Moynihan Train Hall, and he's circulating a plan to move MSG to the Meadowlands, as implausible as that might seem, in relation to the Gateway project being completed. So there are alternatives being circulated out there that we should just, maybe it's fodder or something along those lines.
I feel like I would pick up a fork and demand that MSG not move if the consideration was for it to go to the Meadowlands, frankly, because the economic benefit
Tax revenue
that the city gets, even though we object, of course, to the fact that they don't pay property taxes, but we'd find a way to support them in that regard.
Yeah, but
no, I hear you on that, Dale.
But Jeffrey, you wouldn't have to wait in taxi lines if it was in Meadowlands.
Have you
Sorry,
seen
Dale.
who shows up for those games circulating around Penn Station area?
Yeah, but they still pay a lot of sales tax.
Yes. Anything else, Dale? Sorry, thank you.
No, just to say it's out there. And
Okay.
I have a copy. He sent me a copy if anybody's deeply interested.
Thank you. Jessica?
Thanks. I'll just echo that I really appreciated Bert's comments, and I like Joe's strategy though of just reiterating what the intention is for that space and saying that we would support a relocation without mentioning where that might be, or support the exploration of a relocation. I did want to ask though, and apologies if you referred to this already, because I think Leslie's question touched on it. Do we need a new plan or to just re-up our efforts on educating, particularly our new electeds, on what our intentions are for this space and all of the things that have been previously negotiated that we are still waiting on? If that's not top of mind for them, I heard the reference to the casino, there are lots of things that people could decide are more appropriate uses for this space without keeping these important commitments foremost in their mind. So do we need a strategy for re-educating people on that, or educating people on that?
I wouldn't object to the idea of it. I think, frankly, part of what we're doing right now will turn into an education process about what the expectation is for the Western Rail Yards.
I guess I just don't, the reason I'm suggesting it is maybe separate, and maybe the timeline will be such that it's not necessary, but is that I wouldn't want, part of this is just to be an education on history as opposed to a visioning process for what might still be as it relates to MSG. And I wouldn't want to lose the opportunity for people to have previous commitments which are not to be relitigated. I wouldn't want to lose the opportunity to have that be top of mind for people while new potential opportunities are also considered.
I like that, and I think that comes out of this, because I think what I've been hearing so far is very much an interest in restating our expectations of the Western Rail Yards, which includes ABCD, and it was it has a long history that goes back to the 2005 Hudson Yards rezoning, and then fast forward to 2009. So I think that, yes, it depends on who the letter goes to and how, but I think that's what we're getting at. So thank you for maybe this helps to formalize that education idea. Joe?
Carrie and Katie haven't spoken yet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Carrie?
I was hoping that Joe might answer some of my questions, but since I'm new to this and I don't see, if I missed it, I apologize, but I'm not sure that I just want to understand all of the zoning text amendment or zoning commitments that were made, so that I can understand how we're even talking about this in light of the fact that we have this huge housing problem in the city, and a potential to continue to chip away at that with building housing in that area and a public school. And then my mind spins to how do we have a public school and a casino on the same, plot? So I'm a bit mixed up, except that I totally agree with Jessica and Leslie in the sense that I don't think enough people remember or know about what has been already committed to that space. And I think that whoever said they, drive by and they see a big empty lot, like that's true, right? So I think that's really important that we do that. And I would totally be, in favor of writing a letter to that effect. And I would like a little bit to understand a little bit better about what exactly we did work towards and promise, especially in light of the housing crisis. That's it.
I guess there's we are very familiar with two of the key commitments that came out of the Western Rail Yards rezoning, which was the DEP site and the MTA site were identified as additional mitigation factors. I mean, we fought very hard for the school as well, which is to be built on site, right? That is yet to be realized because they've not even built a platform on the rail yards. And the problem is
there was some green space. I mean, there was a lot of green space.
The whole bunch of other commitments that cannot be realized until they actually move forward with building the platform. And of course, I think that's not going to happen given the current market. And, they've been sitting on this, as Joe said, they closed on the land in 2013. We've seen, I think, 2 upswings and multiple downswings in that time frame, and it still hasn't been realized. So I think it's a to be continued moment on it. Joe, anything else to sort of add in that regard from a big deliverable?
Yeah. One of the things is, first, remember that they did build the Eastern rail yards during those 2 upswings. So they were doing this, they were doing it in stages, Eastern first, then Western, right? Just for everyone's information, the site 1, which is the school and the housing, is on terra firma, the only part that's not on a platform along West 30th Street. So that actually could proceed, but they won't proceed because they can't get a C of O in that building without the school being built. And they want to build the other stuff too. This has been a matter of money. They actually went to the Biden administration trying to get this included in the infrastructure bill to pay for the platform. It's just money. They have to build a very expensive platform and then figure out how to finance it. So that's the sort of underlying issue. But Jeffrey, I would direct people to our board's website. There's like a 5 or 6 page document, points of agreement. There's many other things that we're committed to be done here. But for Carrie's information, it's not just a plan of commitments. Related came and proposed zoning to do this plan. And then in the negotiation pre-ULURP and during ULURP, City Planning, Related, and Community Board 4 and our council speaker, Christine Quinn, went back and forth and got agreements about how that zoning would be shaped. So there's and the zoning, which is very weird in these special zoning districts, Carrie, it's specific to, it says building on site 1, building on site 2. It goes over the high line of this location. It must be so many feet high, set back from the river. Like there's all these very specific, it's not like an idea, it's a full urban design plan that's embedded in the zoning. Plus, as Jeffrey noted, all the commitments that were attached as part of it. So it's very real. Just hasn't been built yet because the financing was not there.
Carrie, if you click on the links in the memo, it'll get you to the page that you can then find that MOU if you want to, or if I have it on one of my tabs somewhere that if I can find, I'll flip it to you as well.
Thank you.
Katie?
Thanks. I think so many great points have been raised this evening about the importance of reminding everyone what is already in place and what is expected there. But I just wanted to say in particular, I think Jessica's idea is a great one of making sure when we have new electeds in office that we take the opportunity in a very sort of affirming way of saying, hey, we just want to give you a list of some of the things that have been, that are important to our community board and that we've worked on for years. And so that, and if we can sort of do it in that way, but certainly include this, I think it's a good reminder, not only to those who've spoken on the issue so far in the electeds, but anybody else, that about what the history is here and what is absolutely expected. So I love the idea of doing something about, just putting out there an education piece and letting everybody know what commitments are on that property and what our expectations are.
Thanks, Katie. Roberta?
So I'm just echoing everything Bert mentioned, but particularly pulling out the housing piece and just how important the commitments, particularly just sheer number of units are. I think that's incredibly important, but I don't really think that's a controversial or unpopular statement. I did have a kind of question. I think I know the answer to it, but in the theoretical example in which one were to move Madison Square Garden to the Western Rail Yards or a casino, they would still have to finance that platform. But your point is that because these are revenue generating things, they would obtain financing. It wouldn't be okay. And that is why housing is less preferable to the developers in this particular case. I don't know if there are ways to entice or to push the developer in this particular case to move forward with the project beyond additional financing, if for no other reason than they've received a really substantial amount of public subsidy in various forms. I don't know if there are other ways to compel the developer to move forward here. But if there are, would love to hear.
Agreed. JD?
Yeah, just to follow up, amplify Christine's comment about the $8.5 million. I believe that would be the cost of condemning the land, and that's what they would have to pay the Dolans. And then it would be another $5.5 billion or something like that to build a new stadium. So we're talking roughly $15 billion. So I think this is unlikely given the climate right now for this to go through. So rather than emphasizing on our part that MSG should move, I would rather we emphasize that Penn Station should be improved. I think that should be our focus rather than pushing for MSG to move, because it's very unlikely that it's going to happen at all. And I think Leslie's comment about at least talking to the council member about our concerns about his statement, either Jeffrey can do it or have a meeting or something, but I think we should express to him our discomfort with his comments.
I've done that because I heard from a number of you, so I'm happy to do it after this meeting again as well. Joe?
Yes, I would move that we do two short letters. The first one is reiterating our commitment to the zoning and the plans of the Western Rail Yard, the A, B, C, and D, and to note that this is a carefully crafted plan, and we expect to work with the city and the developer to move it ahead, right? Then a second, and also I would note that we are, as a community, would not support a casino, because what's happened is in the development world, somebody seeds out an idea as a way to get traction and to get other people around it, that we would, as our board, we would not support a casino on the Western Rail Yards. Just say that, so it's out there and done. The second letter is even shorter, and that's the idea of that, should there be a relocation of Madison Square Garden, our board would be open to talking about it, location, but it's sort of like a general thing if that's the means and mechanisms to improve Penn Station. That's the sort of thing. We have to tie these together. It's not just relocate the garden for itself. It's about you do it to get Penn Station to function better. And that's like a 3-sentence or 4-sentence letter, Jeffrey, that I think there's again, simple consensus around. So I would move for those two separate, very short and sweet letters.
On the second letter, Joe, sorry, who is that to?
The first one is to the mayor, and certainly the mayor, the governor, city planning. That's all about the Western Rail Yards. The second one on the Penn Station thing, I think it's been discussed so much. I would do it again to mayor and governor and just send it to all of our electeds. So it's just like a general policy statement, Jeffrey, just put it out there that we're not adverse to it moving, but has to be discussed where, whatever, And it's only moving it to improve Penn Station. That's the main thing.
I have to say, I'm a little uncomfortable with the second letter, Joe,
Mhm.
because, why? We don't have to say that. It's MSG is in CB5. And by saying that, you may open the mind of people saying, oh, they are kind of saying they're okay with moving it in CB4. And
Well,
I wouldn't want that to be the conclusion. So I would rather not do, I don't think we have to do the second one.
But I think we need to maybe, Christine, we combine them into one letter, which is a kind of policy letter. Here's this great thing that exists.
Yes.
Keep that commitment. And then just say flat out. And there have been proposals or discussions about a casino or MSG relocating, and that we say that this is not the location, something like that.
That's it.
So it ties it together, right? That's
it.
That's it. I certainly
because I think the second letter needs to be more about the zoning, the new permit, and a lot more.
Well, that'll be a major thing we do, I guess, separately.
Right. That's more of a thoughtful input into and mesh that with the public realm improvement and say, these are the things you need to put in.
So then a simple sort of policy statement: don't mess this up this apple cart, and don't even think about bringing other stuff to it because it exists. Whether it's a casino or MSG, just put it out.
Even though we understand that moving it would be a good idea.
Right, exactly, right. Qualifying it, right. So that's my motion there for the exec.
There's hands up, and then I am going to ask for a re-summary of that because I don't think I captured it well enough in my notes. Katie.
Yeah, I just a little unclear about why we're including an explicit reference in the proposed letter to casinos. Because we haven't had discussion about that and it hasn't been proposed. And what we were talking about is, let's just refresh and remind everybody what the commitments are for what's there. That's what we want. And then we can respond about, obviously it wouldn't be the right place for Madison Square Garden because that has been referenced, but I guess I would suggest that we not open the whole Pandora's box about even mentioning a casino. Obviously, if it's
casinos have been mentioned in the press, and Related has said they're going to propose one on the Western Rail Yards.
Isn't there an application?
And we discussed.
To be clear, there are zero
That's right.
applications for any casinos yet.
That's right.
Right.
Well,
Is it
what
just
I
a
would say,
public relations?
as reported in the press by the related companies.
But it's floating out. It's floating out there.
It's out there.
It's out there. Yeah, it's been.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, what they're doing, Katie, is they're testing the waters to see what response they get. So.
Right, which is why, yes, I totally think we need to have a letter saying this area is committed to these
That's
things,
right.
but it's not clear. Anyway.
It has been reported by multiple sources now, not like one, like multiple.
So I'm gonna just jump in here on the casino factor. I purposely chose to not put casino on our agenda this evening because that would have required significant outreach to our block associations and to the numerous civic associations who have been pushing for the topic to be discussed publicly. It is why it's on our agenda for the March meeting, so that those folks can attend this committee meeting with notification and sort of the awareness. So that's coming, and I would prefer to allow the public to be aware of our discussion and allow them to sort of opine on it accordingly. So I understand the gist to sort of insert, but I do want to acknowledge that last week our agenda said Western Rail Yards and casinos, and then had discussions with a number of you, and we sort of let's bring it back to MSG given the timeliness of that factor, and knowing it can sort of punt to the March exec for casinos specifically. Paul.
Yeah, I think I want to go back to the point that Joe is really stressing here is that, the zoning is in place at this site. It's not appropriate for any sort of massive entertainment center. We could use language that skirts to casinos without mentioning casinos. This site was proposed for an Olympic stadium. The community stood against it. A sports arena, a casino, any sort of massive entertainment center would not be appropriate given the zoning that's in place to provide housing and schools and open space. And just be very succinct about it. And, you know, and I like Jessica's point, like we need to educate some of these people. There's people on this committee who don't know what's on that site. So it still looks like an empty site. So let's educate people on what are the commitments, what's going there.
JD?
Yeah, Joe, help me out here. It would require a change of use to put a casino.
It would require rezoning, but more important, because of the special district, Hudson Yards Special District, it would require modifying an entire site plan that says site 1, site 2, site 3, site 4, and each one of those is described to be housing or commercial or a school. Like it's super specific. It's not like it's a
Right, so
general.
I think that answers some of Katie's concerns and what Paul was talking about, if we point that up.
Yeah.
Jesse?
I just want to remind JD and Paul that, I mean, we are trying to get folks to be at your committee on this, topic. So I also just, I understand the idea of coming out with a letter and getting it at full board, but I assume whatever, if a letter comes out, it would not be in opposition to whatever the committee says, but this is, like Jeffrey said at the beginning, this is all land use, and we are aiming to put this on your agenda in March. So
but Jesse, I'm misunderstanding. It's not about moving MSG to the rail yards. It's about the permit. If they come before the land, it's just about the permit.
Yeah.
Yes.
Correct.
That's again, that's what's the active application. I'm just saying that
not have a conflict.
All of
I
this
got you.
is land use. So that's all I'm trying to say is that,
Jesse, are you saying that there shouldn't be a letter coming out of this committee now? Is that what you're saying?
all I'm saying is that you guys we are able to have a bigger land use, in-depth land use conversation, about the permit itself. I wouldn't be surprised if we were talking about the same things that we're talking about tonight. I'm not sure, but that's all I'm saying. So in terms of, putting where it should come out of, but that's.
Paul?
Yeah, Jesse, I think what I started at the beginning of this conversation is to be out in front of what are the commitments there now? What is what do we understand the zoning is? What do we expect the commitments to be followed through on? And I think this executive committee should come out with that statement, regardless of what else is going on. And then when they come to land use and say, we have a permit that we want to apply for MSG and there's some public realm impacts, or we want to look at a casino on this side, whatever they come to with land use, we'll process, we'll go through, we'll do. But what I'm urging this committee to do is stand up now and as I love Jessica's language, educate these people about what exists from the current zoning and the current site plan and what the commitments are. And this is housing, schools, and green space. That's what's there. This is not an empty lot. And I think and then whatever applications come in, we process. And if they want to change the zoning or change the site plans, or they want to do that, that'll be the process we'll go through. But it seems to me that people don't know what the zoning is on that parcel and what are the commitments that have been made there. And I think we just need to echo that and strengthen that. That's my viewpoint on that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think I have a solution to modify this, make it simpler. That we do our defense of the Western Rail Yards letter, zoning, site plan, high line, that's also part of it too. And that we say in any other use, any of the proposed use, such as, ready for this, an arena, a casino, or a mass entertainment venue is not consistent with that prior approved zoning and site plan. And we don't call it out by name, because just put it out there as a marker that those uses are not consistent and supportive of that huge plan that was approved across the board in 2009. Is that a simpler way, Jesse? Jesse.
No, I think that we don't even have to say that, like, basically it's we expect and fully support the zoning that is defined and very detail oriented for the Western Rail Yards. Anything outside of that is not something we would entertain.
I know, but I want to note that we could even say as has been floated by organizations or in the press, just to say that, because as we all heard, not only heard it, it has been reported all over the place. And it's important to say if it's reported, here's what it should be instead. Like, not to note that it's been reported is not being, I think, being politically honest here. The politics are these folks are reporting this in order to try to get other folks to join on with them, whether it be a trade, you know, the building trades union, which was heavily involved in the stadium. These are all folks who are trying to get like support for it. So we should say our support is not for those kinds of uses, but for the ones that were approved, just to say it.
Bert?
Yeah, the context of this letter is a reminder, a loud reminder, a shout out. By the way, folks, in the middle of this conversation, you're saying this, you're saying that. Just remember, we have a commitment to this space. We have a commitment to build X amount of housing units. And we got to say that, the number of housing units involved, okay? This is an ongoing commitment. It was negotiated. We can say when it was approved, And this is what is going on this site. Maybe not tomorrow, but maybe next week, okay? We gotta let people know, remind people again, because people have forgotten. And we gotta do it loudly and clearly. And this letter is not premature to any kind of land use discussion that's gonna happen in March or something that's gonna happen in April. This letter has to go out now. And maybe we'll have to have another letter and another letter saying the same thing in a different way.
Leslie?
I was going to use the exact same language that Bert just said. Again, Bert, you took the words out of my mouth. A reminder, and I think this is a down and dirty letter. It's not a nuanced letter that land use will go over. This is a down and dirty letter. There have been things in the press lately, different ideas about this area in our district. We don't even have to mention it, but you know, there have been a number of ideas floating. We want a gentle reminder to whoever, you know, needs it, that this has already been designated through long and thoughtful negotiations for this unit of housing, this school, this, and that's it. And then, because then like Jesse was saying, like the other stuff, the nuance, the detail can go to the land use and for the open public discussion. But I agree with Bert and Joe that there should be something quick that is just, hey, this is a gentle reminder. We hear the same things you're hearing. So I would second Joe's letter. I don't know if this is the appropriate time for that. If not, then I'll refrain, but I would second it if that is the case.
Last round of comments here. Katie and then Paul.
I also totally agree with what Bert said, though I think it's a little bit different for me from what Joe and Leslie just said. I think it's so important that we just remind everybody that this is already committed for, and remind everybody, you know, as you said, the housing units, the school, everything, the green space, and any other use for the property is going to have to go through long processes in front of our community board and be done. And we don't actually jump the gun and talk about any other use. We just say what the facts are so far, and we remind everybody. I think that's important. And we're not jumping ahead and predetermining what people would decide on any specific thing if it ever did come before the community board. We just say what's in place, would be my thought.
Paul?
I would like to echo that, you know, the letter be short and sweet, that we recognize the current media discussions about options there, which can be presented later, but is not a reality for now. And I think it's critical that we list sort of the number of housing units as close as we can, maybe citing our own housing plan if that has a number in it, or square footage.
The numbers on the points of agreement, Paul. It's all detailed out.
Yeah, but so let's put in the number, I think in this letter, the number of housing units. It's very critical from my perspective that we do that. And then, Mr. Chair, I'd like to call to question.
I'll take Leslie's second, provided it was assumed and acknowledged that I'm going to summarize. I like calling this the defense of the Western Rail Yards, by the way. Very plainly reiterate the commitments expected from the community, that we want to work with the city and developers to move the plan ahead as is expected. We will reference specific numbers of housing units. I want to cite that it's actually a 750 seat school, 5 acres of green space.
5 acres, yeah, 5 acres, right?
Yep, and that any zoning there must be consistent with that expectation. We are understanding of media reports regarding entertainment venues, arenas, casinos, etc. And those will not be considered for use here.
Yeah, just the policy respond.
Marty?
I was looking at the documents today and was impressed that in one place they were talking about the separation of stormwater from sewage for this new platform. Can you put that in?
I
That's
did
fab-
that, Marty. I did that on your behalf.
That was 2009. That
Yes.
I thought that was amazing. Thank you for putting that in, whoever did that. Worth a reference.
Also, Jeffrey, we should note the High Line in there too, because we got the High Line preserved as part of that.
Yeah.
May I ask a clarification?
Yep.
I heard two groups of thoughts here. One which says talking about saying an entertainment will not be here, and another one saying let's not talk about that. I think we need to reference that, but just say this is not included in the present zoning, right?
That's how I was going to refer to it. I was going to wrap it in the fact that there are
It's
media
not in the
reports,
zoning, right?
exactly, that do not comport with what we expect to
The
be
zoning nor the approved site plan.
Right, exactly.
I mean, you might want to be a little snotty about it. You know, people are talking as if there's no zoning on this place.
Yes, a long, thoughtful process that was zoned. That we
Right.
went through, yes.
Right.
And which was
You know?
part of a much bigger plan, the whole
Exactly.
rail yard.
Bert, as you well know, I have no ability to be snotty or snarky whatsoever. So
I appreciate that, Jeffrey. I appreciate that.
Noted. Any other, so based
We're
on that
voting.
summary and Christine's addition, any objections? Present not eligible? Abstentions? Thank you, everybody. Another letter passes. A busy exec this evening. I skipped item 4, the bylaws working group, bylaws review working group. It's actually going to be a committee. And so I'm requesting your vote this evening to constitute that. The committee is going to be made up of 8 people. It will be subject to all the sort of requirements of our existing committees. I'm pleased to say that we have 2 co-chairs, Katie Stokes and Bob Benfato, who many of you may know, may recall was the former district manager of CB4, and he was the last person to look at the bylaws back in 2008, he told me. So he'll be back at the docket this round. The co-chairs will be joined by Candace Hewitt, Roberta Barnett, Frank Holozubiak, Alice Wong, Wendy Gonzalez, and Bert Lazarin. Once you guys take this vote tonight, we're going to get together and figure out what, when this committee is going to meet, and that will sort of go forward from there. I do anticipate this to be a 3 to 4 month process is kind of my thinking. Maybe I'm being super optimistic, but really with 1 meeting a month, figuring out how to slice and dice it, I'm obviously going to leave this to my further discussions with the co-chairs, but hoping that they make a recommendation that would then come back through exec and then go to the full board. I know there's a couple of folks here that are going to be on that committee, so any additions or questions? Christine, please.
Is that the committee is going to decide itself what is the scope?
So
or
just
have you given a sort of scope to the committee?
Yeah, a couple of things on the scope, very specifically, is that it will be, my first goal is to update the bylaws to be more reflective of how we do business today, to incorporate potentially some of the things we've adopted as part of our hybrid policy. that something that I think I feel very strongly about, and I'm certainly going to emphasize it to the co-chairs. And I know Frank and I had this discussion. This is not going to get into a mission discussion, a mission of the community board. Our bylaws are how we function. They are our governing documents. And so very sort of cut and dry in that regard. And that, you know, there's actually been a lot of changes to borough presidents adopting codes of conduct. Are we thinking about terms? You know, Lowell proposed a couple of full board meetings ago, would our elections committee just go every other year, basically? Are we switching terms? So I think, you know, we open it up for discussion initially, but that's my initial direction for scope, if that makes sense, Christine.
Okay.
Joe?
Move to establish a bylaws committee.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks, Paul. Any objections? Abstentions or present not eligible? Thank you, everybody. And thanks to those on this committee for being a part of this group. I know the lawyers are kind of excited about this, so thank you to that. Okay, moving on in the agenda, my chair's report. I want to formally acknowledge that we are going to shift the acronym and name for how we refer to our Transportation Planning Committee. I'd like to formalize it and call it TPC. All of the other committees have the acronym that's reflective of their title. I'd like transportation to do the same. This is sort of out of acknowledgement and respect for the fact that members of the LGBT community could be confused for how we have long referred to that committee. So I appreciate this, Dale and Christine supporting me on this, a small but potentially significant thing. So going forward, if you see TPC, that is to stand for our Transportation Planning Committee. Task forces, working groups, and small meetings. I'm going to talk about Chelsea NYCHA update at the end. Port Authority Bus Terminal Replacement Working Group. We've met with the port. Discussions are ongoing. Bert, anything high level you want to say other than sort of we're back at the table with them?
The only thing I want to say is we're back at the table with them and we want to maintain the table and us around with them on the table. That's still, it's not up in the air, and we have a commitment.
We're working on it.
But the commitment, you know, is only as good as, oh, we have a meeting scheduled for next week, and then we have a meeting scheduled for 2 weeks. So we're moving in that direction.
I also want to note, and this would have come out in my meetings report, that the Port Authority Working Group also met with the Department of City Planning and DOT about this. So we've had a lot of significant conversations and have sort of been scaled up a lot on the port recently. So stay tuned, and again, we hope that continues.
And we have the meeting tomorrow.
Exactly. We're sort of bringing our elected official liaisons together to, again, going back to the references of education, to bring them up to speed on the project, to sort of give them the power to shepherd our interests forward on this. So that's sort of happened in previous iterations of the port discussion. So we're looking to do that again. Jessica, anything high level to share on the Capstone Project Working Group?
They just completed their survey, so thank you for those who participated in that. And they will be bringing that feedback together with their interviews to begin identifying specific locations with which to consider recommendations.
Thank you. On Penn Station, there's been a lot of talk. I referenced what the Director of State Operations said this morning at a breakfast. Christine, anything to add on sort of public realm task force?
No, there were 3 meetings, and the next meeting is supposed to be the consultant XYZ coming back.
WXY.
WXY.
I love it.
WXY.
Claire would like that too.
Right, WXY presenting their, essentially a proposal or a finding, and that is why I was saying the public realm task force should take in account what those recommendations are.
Got it. Thank you for that. The Cannabis Working Group, we transmitted our recommendations to the state. And I think we're sort of awaiting to figure out what's next. Jesse Bodine, any other updates on? Nothing. I don't think anything at the moment. Sorry.
We are working on trying, as the working group members know, we've been discussing about a forum, a public forum, to educate the community, just because there's, while it's gotten somewhat better, there has been some enforcement done by different agencies that we still obviously know that there's a lot of miscommunication, misinformation out there. So we're in the works of putting together a forum that would be, public on Zoom most likely, and widely distributed.
Hands, Leslie.
I just have a question, actually.
Sure.
The cannabis working, so if there are cannabis related, I guess, items, issues, topics that people would like to talk about the community board, such as public smoking areas or whatever it is, would that go to ACEs, Jeffrey, or do you want it all housed in the cannabis working group? And I know the cannabis working group is just necessarily right now enforcement of these outposts, but I didn't know as we expand where we should direct people.
Yeah, it's a fair question. I think that I don't have a complete answer for you on that tonight because I want to have a discussion with ACE's leadership on that. Frankly, we haven't. I think also I see Frank's hand, but just acknowledging that at some point, this is going to be a licensing question. And does the Cannabis Working Group, is that constituted in some kind of additional licensing committee specific for cannabis? I'd be concerned about that because I don't think we're going to see the saturation of licenses that we see for liquor. And so that the continuity of BLP, I also don't want to inundate the BLP agenda that is already pretty significant. So Roberta, if you don't mind, I'm going to go to Frank on this first. Frank?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that. When the working group was formed, one of its stated purposes was to determine how to work a recommendation on how to work the cannabis issues into the community board structure, whether they would be divided among existing committees, whether there would be a new committee, and so forth. So I think that is something the working group is going to talk about and make a recommendation to the full board. But I don't think anyone envisioned the working group beginning to deal with specific issues. The working group was more sort of structural interim organization.
Thanks, Frank. Roberta? So Leslie, stay tuned. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I just mentioned it because I think the Times Square bid put up some signs about these are cannabis-free zone. Anyway, there was a few things, and some people were asking me, "Can we talk about this?" And I should have asked offline anyway, but I was just curious because you mentioned it. Thank you.
Just a quick question from coming out of the last month's exec meeting. Was there any progress in attempting to get a list of licenses from the Office of Cannabis Management, or either in the near future or further down the line? I know that was something we had discussed.
Roberta, I'm sorry, just understand, a list of licenses, and you mean in our district?
Yes.
There's none.
I mean, there are none in our district, but there could, in theory, in the future be, and then the permits for those. We had some sort of discussion about that.
The way the system works right now is that's nearly impossible. So, I'm happy to, I don't want to take everybody's time, but it's unfortunately it's not very clear, but basically it's not done by location. It's actually done by application, and those applications don't have a confirmed location until the last stage of their review. So we wouldn't know really of an application and their proposed location or confirmed location, because if it went through the dormitory authority, that deal has already been sealed. Then until the very end, until our 30-day comment. So if that answers your question.
Helpful, thank you.
Mr. Bodine, your hand is up next.
Oh, that's what I was just going to say very, very quickly about if there are issues that or you're hearing from folks about, specific locations that are possibly, that we know that are unlicensed and that they, that believe, are bad operators in some way. There is enforcement out there. I'm happy as the office to help people understand where they can go to, report that and hopefully have it be responded to by the appropriate agency. It is a little complex and convoluted, and but I'm happy to do that. So Leslie, if there are specific areas or suggest locations or whatever, or this policy stuff, I'm happy to have that conversation.
Thanks, Jesse. Dale? Roberta, was that it? Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
Sorry,
and
Dale.
Sorry, I'll lower my hand.
Yeah, and just to add to what Jesse said about the licensing, it's true. None of the pot shops that have opened and retail stores are in our district are licensed. Some of them are now saying they're in the pipeline to get licensed. That is also not true because they, as Jesse pointed out, that's not part of the that's not the process. So don't let anybody get over on you with that, deception.
I appreciate the pipe reference, Dale. Any other questions on the cannabis working group? Excellent. Other sort of small meetings and updates. Jesse and I were briefed on the SL Green and Caesars Palace Casino proposal for Times Square. It's not in our district. We emphasized that repeatedly in advance of the call, during the call, and they still didn't get to the concerns that we had. So I appreciate what I see as all your sympathy for Jesse and I having had to sit through this briefing that had nothing to do with the concerns of what we wanted to raise. Health, Housing, and Human Services and elected officials, as well as Jesse and me, we met with the new owners of the Hudson Hotel for a briefing on the conversion. This hotel is undergoing conversion from hotel to residential. It's been bought by a Mexico-based developer who has said very plainly that they will not be sort of developing it as a with like what we would categorize as affordable housing, but they're also not trying to position it as luxury housing. We had a very frank and educational first meeting with them. I think they were, I have to say, I appreciated the candor of the developer and Joe's ability to quickly educate them in about 55 minutes. Discussions are ongoing with the tenants there, including getting them representation potentially through Goddard Riverside or HCC, who both sort of provide tenant legal services and representation in instances like this. And of course, the ongoing concerns around any demolition that has to do with existing SRO units is really significant. Joe, anything to add on top of that?
Yeah, I want, as a follow-up, is a very odd thing. They're definitely singular. Jeffrey, they sent me a handwritten thank you note for our meeting by FedEx. I've never seen this in my entire career.
But I mean, I have to say, I appreciate that.
I know, sort of like, okay, who am I working?
They wanted to make sure you got it almost as quickly as an email, so they sent it via FedEx overnight. But look, I think there is definitely, I can't think of the number of SRO tenants off the top of my head.
30 to 35.
30 to 35 existing units in the building. So look, we have a lot of familiarity with this. There's discussion of whether or not we introduce this developer to the current owner of the Chelsea Hotel, who sort of in the end did a really good job of managing the existing tenants there through construction. But I think it was a very good opening of the door to continued engagement and discussions with this developer. Christine?
I think there was also 40 units which were empty and they were demolishing them. So there were 40.
More than that now, more than that. They're doing demolition contrary.
But are those any that we can save?
They don't have authority to actually do the demolition. They said they have emergency work to be done. That was a back and forth. Jesse's working with both DOB, right, Jesse?
Okay.
And
yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but I think Christine's question was the same one I had to you for Joe, about whether there was the preservation of those empty units, but I don't think that's.
The units are governed by 2 sets of regulations. One, the SRO law, Local Law 19, that merely says as long as you haven't harassed, there's no bar that says you must preserve them. But they're also in the perimeter area B of the Clinton Special Zoning District. And that's again harassment issues. So we're just working through that to go through that process to get sure there's a certificate of harassment. If you get one and you harass subsequently, meaning through construction, you can also be stopped. We're trying to figure out what's going on here. Tenants send Jesse, right, multiple videos of full demolition of units, which are not authorized under their current building permit.
Right.
We were successful in getting DOB out there twice already. We'll continue to do so.
Wow.
We reached out to Goddard, like Jeffrey said, to represent them. They did represent them at one point. We want them to re-engage. And then we've also reached out to the tenant protection unit at DOB specifically to make sure that they're aware of this. So, I think a lot of eyes are on this.
Okay.
And I think it'll continue to remain that way. CB4 staff attended the ongoing West 28th Street MTA substation community advisory council meetings, and the Clinton Hell's Kitchen Land Use Committee reconnected with owners of 343 West 47th Street regarding their special permit application. And then a number of Board 4 members and staff attended the precinct commanding officer candidate forums for the 13th precinct and Midtown South. Speaking on the vein of precincts, I want to commend the 10th precinct for some recent significant arrests of repeat offenders of really significant crimes. I also want to acknowledge the real concerns happening in the LGBT community and the specific targeting of folks who are going to those bars. I've had a lot of conversations with the owner of the Eagle, which is the gay bar on West 28th Street. They're undertaking an education campaign to get consumers to turn off their facial recognition on their phones. What has happened numerous times, including reports of 2 deaths last year, people end up having their drink drugged. They then are convinced to get into a cab or somebody's vehicle. The phone is then used, held in front of their face, and then their Venmo, Penn Pal, bank accounts, Penn Pal, PayPal, bank accounts are emptied. And so the gist of education is to turn off your facial recognition. The police have been very engaged in discussions with the Eagle. And I have to say, I think I've been doing a very good job. I had a very significant exchange with the commanding officer of the 10th about some concerns I had initially on how it was reported out of their precinct community council meeting, but I have since had many conversations, and including with the owner of the Eagle, who's very pleased with how the police is handling the situation. That said, it's a major education factor, and I hope that more bars, for of all types, think about educating consumers about the dangers of facial recognition. Back to the top of the list on the report.
I just have one item, Jeffrey, that I got pulled into in the last couple of days, so people know.
Sure.
The former Till buildings, the city-owned buildings on 22nd and 7th, the demolition is proceeding there. And in the middle of it, the community found that there were cast iron columns at the front of the buildings that have been hidden for many years. And I got pulled into a discussion back and forth about it to salvage those columns by a number of Chelsea stakeholders.
You're kidding.
And I am reporting that, in fact, Affy, the developer, and the council member and the community board have all come to the conclusion that the columns can be salvaged, and we're figuring a place to put them temporarily, and then they may end up in Hudson River Park as part of it, and also some back in the building. But I spent a lot of time on 7 cast iron columns, 2 of which are 17 feet high. So just
maybe there's a future. Maybe there's a future park pier they can live in.
Are these, Joe, are these columns that were at one time part of a facade?
They were the ground floor holding up this building. Yes.
So
You
we're
should
going
put them
back
in
to the
Madison
original.
Square Garden.
Just wanted to note that, Jeffrey. I thought you'd appreciate.
That's great. That is a good update as it relates to the Till buildings.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Okay, so NYCHA developments in Chelsea. Speaking specifically of our Chelsea Elliott and Fulton developments, we've been made aware over the past month or so and had a significant meeting last Thursday regarding some interest from the tenants to change what is the long understood plan based on a multi-year working group for the complete renovation of the NYCHA apartments in Chelsea. That 3-year working group, of which Community Board 4 was a working member and a critical component to, really went away when they came up with this plan to renovate fully all of these buildings at a price of about $350 million. That work was supposed to commence this very year. Since the time the working groups stopped, the tenants associations at both buildings have continued to meet as a TA, and then with the developers that were chosen. The developers chosen was a company named Essence, and also with co-development from related companies who we all know well. At the meeting we had last week with tenants, our elected officials, and the developers, it was made clear from the tenants that based on many discussions they'd had over the past several months, one of the new building that was going to be going on to the NYCHA campus was 50% affordable, 50% market rate, but not a guaranteed placement for NYCHA tenants. And as a part of that, they came back and asked NYCHA what a possibility would look like for them to have replacement housing and completely new buildings. NYCHA responded, sort of requesting basically the developer to take a look at this. And now, frankly, the tenants are advocating for wholesale new apartments and new buildings. This is a very early conversation that has started amongst the tenants associations at the two respective campuses. Obviously, this is a significant change from the expectation that these buildings would receive a 100% renovation. But I would note that once the developer received access to the buildings, the price went from $350 million to potentially $1.2 billion for the renovation. This had everything to do from the fact that obviously they didn't have a full understanding of how bad the shape of the buildings were in. And that at the end of the day, it wasn't just about inflation for the increase in costs, but just significantly more work. The buildings, were not in good condition, nor were they built to endure what they have sort of up to this day. So fast forward to where we are. Again, all of our elected officials were around the table during this meeting. The tenants are moving forward with the discussion to inform other tenants about the potential of this plan, which again, replacement housing, new buildings, new apartments, and potential for other housing on the blocks of what we refer to as the NYCHA campuses. There's potentially 3 plans that may work their way out. 2 would be as of right. 1 would involve a ULURP. I would say the baseline is that any replacement that happens, it's a 1-for-1 replacement of NYCHA units. Any additional units would be a mix of market rate and potential and a band of affordable, what we call our affordable housing. And that's kind of the baseline for the discussion that we had last Thursday. I will say that Politico published an article that came out at 6:47 today. It's Politico Pro, so it's a subscription. I will circulate it if folks are interested in this article. And that obviously this is a very early framing of this discussion, because the tenants of our NYCHA campuses have a lot of work to do, to do anything as a part of this. I will say a couple of things. Once again, I wish I could say partners at NYCHA have not, done the best job as it relates to moving these PACT programs forward on the campuses, and tenants are fed up. I think as it relates to a renovation, we're very familiar with wholesale gut renovations of buildings. So that's not a foreign concept to us. The one thing that was emphasized in the meeting is that even though with a full gut wholesale renovation, a major factor is the elevator shafts, which today not only cannot fit a gurney, but have trouble fitting a wheelchair. So just to give you the scope of size of how small these elevator shafts are. I see Joe's hand up to start, and then obviously this is sort of an open discussion on this, not expecting a letter in any way on this evening, but more informative. Also acknowledging that anything from this is obviously a land use discussion and a housing discussion. So, I don't expect this to always live in exec, but wanted to report it out, what we've learned this evening. Joe?
Yeah, so I had a few things that came out of this presentation. The first one is, in the RFP, we confirmed that the cost estimate was 376 million, and that's what we solved for that. When Related put in their response, they brought that to 450 million. But when we looked at the information they put on a screen, it did not include full renovation. The question I raised was why NYCHA was engaging with anything that would not include full renovation. So we heard a lot from the tenants that this was not a good idea to renovate because other parts in the city, NYCHA was renovated and it was like lipstick on a pig. It wasn't full renovation. We cut a deal and an agreement as part of the working group, and it's embodied in the RFP for 100% renovation, including all new systems, plumbing, wiring, all the way through. So that's a curious bit. The second thing is the Essence, the developer, and Related claimed they did not get access to the property and they did not get the condition reports. That's something, again, I find very strange in this process because that's what you normally do for due diligence from the agency. They give you all that information so you can properly, price something out. The genesis of the single person developer Essence, who seems to be less a large company, but more Related. He was a vice president of Related, set up his own company. He noted that in a meeting in discussing that demolition of Hudson Guild and a new building, NYCHA tenants said, why don't we get new apartments? And that started this whole conversation off that everyone should have a new apartment, the same thing like everybody else. As I met with Jamar Adams, who's from Essence, the week before to get some background on this. And I tried to understand what is the scope of work? What is put forth here? How do we get to this spot where something goes from 450 million to 1.2 billion? So I learned, for example, that as part of the work, nothing was thought about for asbestos or lead. Well, that's a big issue. You have to do relocation for lead. These buildings are at the age of lead. Asbestos, though, it seems to be only in the vinyl tiles, not such a big deal. The next piece I learned was that NYCHA, for insulation, to make them more energy efficient, NYCHA required, instead of doing insulation inside the apartments, to reclad every single building of both complexes. That would add alone $66 million. So I think there's been a lot of discussion back and forth that has created, there are real things that have driven up the price, then there are the choices that have been made that have driven up the price here. If anyone said to me, would you prefer a new building or a renovated building? And I've lived in horrible conditions forever. I'm going to say, I want a new building. I want a new apartment. That's just the basic sort of human thing to happen. The real concern I have here is that the plan we saw, and by the way, let's not call them a plan. We saw a PowerPoint, and a PowerPoint was a bit animated, in the animation in it. It calls for 100% demolition of every existing building on both NYCHA campuses, being built over phases, full relocation of tenants from building to building or offsite, and then creating, at the end of the day, euphemistically called 2 development zones for Related Essence that would allow 2.3 million square feet to be built. As
Joe,
comparison,
just a factor there.
yes.
That is if they get full ULURP and maximum allowable zoning.
That's actually, no, that's not full ULURP. That's the current unused zoning square footage. That's what they represented, which I found kind of interesting. Right? So let's say for a moment it's not 2.3 million square feet is the size of the Stour Lehigh building. Let's say it's not that. Let's say it's half that. 1 million square feet, right, is the size of, let's say, the Condé Nast building. So we're talking about a huge piece of additional development. And when they first presented in this, it was a very informal discussion. They stated, well, could this be done under the RFP? So I raised a question. I thought about this subsequently. NYCHA said, yes, the RFP was very open. They can make a change. I think we have a huge policy issue, no matter what, that an RFP could be issued by an agency and then turn from something that people competitively bid on for renovation. And now it is a whole new plan entirely. Our conversation in that meeting kept going back to, do you support the tenants or not? The tenants are living in horrible conditions. And the answer is, of course, we support the tenants. And we know they've been living in horrible conditions from day one. That's not like a new idea here. But it was brought up as, you all support the tenants. And the elected officials all nodded their heads. I believe, and I said to Jeffrey earlier today, that we have a humongous discussion here about policy. We have something that's hit citywide questions about demolition of NYCHA housing. It is not just about the Chelsea NYCHA tenants. We now drag ourselves into a huge citywide discussion, and various factions or policy people are going to show up on this issue. And I am really concerned with it. Although I think there should be a lot of flexibility in how this gets executed, that we may drag ourselves into a citywide discussion about what happens with NYCHA buildings. And if this happens here, why would you not then go and demolish the Amsterdam houses to the north? Those are low rise or mid rise. I just think and I also want to note, it's not only about the tenants. This is the related companies who own millions of square feet in West Chelsea and Hudson Yards. And all of this is about redefining and changing the entire part of Chelsea. I do not believe that we should ever knock anything out of hand. That is not how we do it. We want to figure out how to make it better. I just was so surprised because the entire plan was proposed. If we do it this way, everyone will get a new apartment in 4 years. I felt embarrassed that somebody would claim that, knowing that a single person holding out or a bunch of people holding out or a faction of people who sue, it's all going to take much longer. So I'm very nervous about this. And Jeffrey and I had a long conversation today. We need to approach this very carefully and very thoughtfully. And I think there's a lot more happening here than just the tenants having a vote to say, here's what we want. I'm very concerned about it. So I just put that out there just as our discussion points as we go forward. That's all.
Terry?
Thanks, Joe. How are we going forward, and how can land use help you?
There's no
plan.
Want the community board getting ahead of the tenants in any way, shape, or form on this. They've committed to engagement, with their neighbors through the tenants association, sort of building by building. They hope to have that education done in the next couple of months. And there's discussion that they would sort of take a vote on whether or not they proceed with the idea of a demo plan. While I sort of acknowledge everything that Joe said, like a lot of what was showed to us was very preliminary. And I think there's always problems in preliminary, in major ways. And that's sort of where we come in to make it better if it becomes anything at all. I want to be very sensitive to the tenants and our neighbors at NYCHA, and that there's literally not a proposal before us. And my gosh, if that proposal was the formal proposal, it's will be short-lived. Sorry, Carrie, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to follow up real quick. I didn't write down the square footage numbers, but I'm wondering where are these air rights that are where these new,
I have to say to you, Kerry, we saw something
because
that
you know
was
there's
so
a lot of open space within the
Yep.
blocks. So I'm wondering, like, where are they building? Where are they building?
So there would be within that, as Joe mentioned, they would be taking down the existing buildings that we very much know and refer to as, the NYCHA campuses today, and then doing replacement buildings.
Higher or wider?
That's all
or-
sort of, I mean,
Right.
I am willing to say that is to be determined. There's
Right,
three
but-
plans that they sort of talked about. 2 are as of right, which would fill everything in and add a little bit more height. But both of those, as I understood it, would not go above the current height sort of the towers as we know. If they pursue a ULURP action,
Right.
that would open the can
Right.
of more height.
we saw, listen, we saw there is no height restriction, right? Let's be clear. There are 8 zones and you could take all the development rights or you can knock one building down. There is no height restriction on these campuses, right? So therefore, that's an issue. We saw buildings that went from 20, 30, and 40 stories. The Jamar from Essence, not being fully, trained in this stuff, called it 12 buildings, FAR 12 buildings. So there's no FAR 12, it's 10 bonusable 12, right? So there were multiple things here, but my concern is, honestly and bluntly, I think the tenants believe more that these are plans that are really fully developed.
Right.
And that's an issue because if you're going to get a new apartment, you're going to embrace something. There were towers planned for south of Chelsea Park. I raised during the course of the meeting, if you're building a tower south of the park, there's environmental considerations. Like I just think there's a lot of stuff here that is not really unpacked. And I'm very concerned the tenants are going to get far ahead with an idea that's an idea as opposed to a plan. And then there's going to be a vote that they endorse this idea. And now how does this all get effectuated when there's controversy or division that could happen among them? And I said to Jeffrey this afternoon, I'm concerned they're going to get nothing.
One last question, because I'm sure it's coming, right? Why is there any market rate housing in these plans? Like, if we're going to increase or what's the word I'm looking for? If we're gonna fill up the FAR that they already can fill up, like, why aren't they all affordable NYCHA housing? Like, why are we even talking about market rate housing in these campuses?
In the approved working group plan, we had about 6 small infill sites that included 50% market and 50% low, moderate, and middle in order to provide a cushion for financing for NYCHA. And we got to that by a heavy compromise back and forth. The NYCHA wanted, 70% market. We got them down to 50% market. And then we also put an affordable component that was broader range of incomes. So that was a huge internal back and forth among the members of the working group, including the tenants.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
Jesse?
I just wanted to ask, I defer to Joe and Jeffrey. I think at this point, though, after the meeting can we request I think a good baseline would be a briefing, right? For us. You're on mute, Joe.
I
think we should actually have them to a housing or land use committee to start to, because part of it is the discussion's happening and it's not happening in the full public realm. And I think it should happen, and then we back and forth and see where the appetite is each way. It's got to be done publicly, because I think that's the problem. This has been known about. Maybe Jeffrey and I found out about this about 3-4 weeks ago, Jeffrey, approximate.
Yeah.
But this has been discussed for months and months, and that's not the way in our neighborhood we normally do business. We talk about it, and so I would suggest to bring them to either housing or land use to have a discussion about it. Just, a presentation, initial where you are, what's going. The tenants will be very vocal in favor. The tenant leaders were 100% vocal in favor. They reported toward the end of the meeting, they had met with the mayor and the mayor approved this. When I hear stuff like that, this is all politics. Charlie King was the advisor he was head of the Manhattan Democratic Party, sat in the room. he was one of the consultants. Another person was in charge of messaging. Well, that to me feels like this is a lot of related involved in how they're going to go about a bit of work. So again, there's got to be some middle ground, figure out how to make it work. I don't know, but you know, there's a lot more happening here.
Well, just please let us know if that's what the.
Oh, you'll know, Jesse.
Okay.
Alan?
Yeah, thank you. John, and this is coming from the same tenants group and the same leadership that you were dealing with in the original process?
This is, I sat with these folks. I met with them prior to this meeting to get a good briefing, and it's the same group. But another thing I noted to them is a lot of the people who were against the pact idea have now moved or died. I said, you better be concerned that a group may spring up again, the naysayer types that don't want anything to happen. Because now they're saying, they could say that the exact thing that we talked about not happening is going to happen. It's a way to clear the land and to get, even though it's being replaced. This is a whole, so there's a lot of politics on here we have to sort out.
Roberta?
I am curious if there have been discussions as to how to ensure that if there are either renovations or newly completed buildings, how to ensure that those are completed either ahead of or before a certificate of occupancy is like given for any new development, mixed income development.
That's the key factor here, and that informed the decision, I think, at the end of the day of why the tenants thought, oh, we can get new, is that the new building would be built, and then they'd move people into that new building, and there would not be displacement, you know, while that happened. With renovation, there would definitely be relocation.
Within Chelsea, though.
Theoretically, in Chelsea, Joe, they did not commit to Chelsea relocation to me. They talked about a couple of potential buildings on 11th Avenue for seniors, but that was based on just the 80 senior units. It was not on.
Mar Adams stated to me that they would, first of all, they would lease a hotel to do temporary relocation, that they would cycle people through. And then I heard for the first time at that meeting, Jeffrey, that they talked about something on 11th Avenue they own.
That was for the senior buildings, yes.
But they actually said that they were leasing a hotel because he had a whole meal program to be set up too.
That wasn't talked about at our meetings. So that must have been in a subsequent conversation you had with him.
No, it was prior when he gave me the briefing.
No, Roberta, a major factor and like flag from get-go was about, you know, I think I referenced Essex Crossing, right at the time, that look at the promises that were made for decades to tenants of public housing. It was demoed before development, and then they ended up in far-flung corners of the
that
city.
was not public housing. That was the city-owned buildings.
It was city-owned buildings.
Right.
But the same narrative of demolition before anything, and then you end up displacing people and ruining their lives.
Roberta, PACT requires that people are relocated and come back to their units. It's part of the RAD PACT conversion. So it has been done successfully across the city. People have not just been dispersed.
Leslie?
Thanks. Sorry, I had to give my other mic. I know this is all, I think, very premature as far as the details of all this. It's going to be a very long, drawn out thing. Is anyone troubled by like the RFP being, it seems like there was a competitive process, right? Under one contract, but one RFP, very competitive. And then not surprisingly, once the company, whoever gets it, is now saying, thank you, we got it, this is great, celebration. And then, oh, you know what, we can't do it for that, we're gonna do it for this. And it's not gonna be RFP'd again. Do you know what I mean? Like is that troubling to anybody? Or is it just me that thinks it's, I don't wanna say bait and switch, you know, but it's like everyone competed for one specific thing. And now that one specific thing is changing into a totally different thing. I'm not commenting for, against, or anything on that, but more the process of the RFP. Or am I jumping the gun? Or
I think there's some. If you apply for this and didn't get it based upon your numbers, and then someone got it and they do it a different way, I think there's definitely questions of legal issues around that. That as open as it may be, someone, you know, that's going to be brought up. It's going to be brought up.
Sure. Mike, Mr. Noble, welcome.
Yeah,
over.
hi. Thanks. Let me introduce my comments by saying that I received the invitation to the meeting that Joe's talking about, and Jeffrey's talking about. When I got that, it was curious to me because I didn't get it from anywhere else but Jesse. So I asked Darlene Waters about it, and she said, "Oh, no, that's just me and Miguel, right? Two tenant association, leaders, right? And therefore, it's not for you." And I said, "Well, look here, I'm a member of the committee, right? There's 10 of us from both developments who are shepherding this thing through the system, through the process, all right? The last time my subcommittee had a meeting was months and months ago. and it was simply, to get the timelines and all that other business, which I can give to you and let you know what timeline. So they're going to start construction here. They're going to close the contract and all that, like next June. Okay, the end of the second quarter. That's when everything is, as far as we know, happening. Right. It all starts a year from this June. All right. And that was it. So I apologize for not having attended that meeting, as I said I would, but I was told not to. So when you say, Joe, that you spoke to tenants, I think you only spoke to 2 tenants, Miguel and Darlene. Right?
Our board invited Hector. To make him come.
Well, did he come? No.
Yeah, he did actually. He did.
Yeah.
Oh, he did?
Invited by Jesse.
Yeah, well, I know that. I saw that. But I was put off by Darlene. In any event, let me tell you that the committee that I am on, right? Well, there are 3 subcommittees. The one that I chose to be on is the management committee, management, dealing with Essex, who are going to be the property managers now. I didn't get into the other 2 subcommittees, which I could have, but I said, no, let me just deal with management, because I thought everything was moving along nicely. They came and they looked at as many apartments as they could to assess what had to be done to renovate, right? So they had this whole list of people who made their apartments available for inspection, right? And it had to do with lead and had to do with all the other stuff, right? What I'm saying is that if anybody should be upset, it's me, because nobody told me what precisely was going to happen at this meeting. And I'm going to call Darlene tomorrow and tell her, hey, look, you should have told me it was on the agenda here, and you shouldn't have put me off my feed, So I'm hurt that I was not included as I was intended to be. All right. I can tell you that as far as the RFP is concerned, the other members of the committee, as far as I know, are of the mind that it's all going to happen in accordance with the RFP that we, in fact, drafted, right? And in accordance with the agreement that we had with the developers that we chose. We chose Related and Essence, right? We discarded those other 2 because they were just so far off the mark that it was a joke. So yeah, we felt a connection, especially to Jamar Adams, right? Seems like an honest guy, somebody who's sympathetic with the tenants. It doesn't look that way. He should have come to all of us on those subcommittees and told us what was happening here. I should have gotten an invitation from one of them, not from Jesse, for God's sakes, right? This is an internal committee. We're the guys who are supposedly watching this thing happen right to the very end, right? More so than CB4, right? It should have been a heads up to the committee members. And as far as I know, that didn't happen. I didn't get any notice about it. I didn't hear anybody talking about it. Anyway, so that's where that is. So it's even worse than you're portraying it to be, Joe. It's even worse. So if they're hiding the ball, as to meetings like this one, which is significant, they could be hiding the ball on everything.
Are you not, you didn't have some committee action or discussion about
Nope.
proposing, moving it from renovation to the full demolition?
No, absolutely not.
That was
Not-
Joe, my understanding of that was at the Tenants Association meeting.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what makes Darlene and Miguel think that they speak for everybody. Well, there are other people on the subcommittees who are actually involved with the developer and the manager, right? Who should have been notified about all this, right? You got to understand that Darlene and Miguel like to take charge and make it appear that they speak for everybody when they actually don't, all right? But I will bring this up to Jamar. I'll bring it up to Darlene, in my own time. So it ain't a done deal. That's for sure.
Thank you,
All
Mike.
right? Okay.
And also next time, I'm sorry.
I
about
was
the-
gonna call you or Jesse, and I should have.
Yes,
And I
sir.
would, I really messed up on that one. She convinced me, no. You're gonna look like a horse's ass if you show up here. Okay. Well, that's what
Sorry about
ultimately
that. Let
happened.
us know next time. Thank you for joining.
Okay, I will.
Christine, you're on mute.
I'm saying there is nothing wrong with it being an horse's ass, if you are right at the end of the day. It looks like the developer did a fantastic job of going around and lobbying and going around the tenants and taking that to the step where they want to be. And I think Joe has a good point that there is a lot of legal issues there about getting an RFP, and Leslie is right too, because you get an RFP to do A, and then, hello, I'm doing B, and then you get everybody meeting with the mayor, and it sounds good, so this is a big deal, I think. And the thing that I'm very much concerned about is that it's going to be another 3 or 4 years for those tenants to see anything happening, and they're going to suffer for a long time until all that stuff is resolved.
Yeah, it's not just tweaking what's already been approved in the RFP.
Right.
We're talking about major construction.
Yeah, you're talking about redoing everything.
Yeah, we talked them down on building one of these big high rises so that now it's just one, right? Well, no, this is, if we're arguing and debating that issue, well, this is far larger. It's a much bigger issue than that one building is going to be. So no, it's this major thing. And as speaking as a lawyer, yeah, this contract is probably not enforceable the way they want it to be. And that's another issue. I don't know that the RFP can be enforced in the manner in which they want it to be, is what I'm saying, right?
Thanks, Mike.
Okay.
Like this requires a lot of public debate and discussion. And during the course of this discussion, they talked about, certain buildings would not comply with zoning. And I said, oh, well, you can do a mayoral override, as we've done before in both campuses, right? But that was before we saw the whole demolition and rebuild everything. And there were, as Jeffrey noted, degrees of, density. But again, that's not a mayoral override, that degree. This has got to be a full public discussion. And I don't believe that there was Jerry Nadler asked the question, would it be ULURP? When we first understood it was not full demolition, I said, well, you can do mayoral override. Then as I got further, there was a discussion about whether this is in the public discussion or not. NYCHA is not subject to ULURP, well, not subject to ULURP, but this is a major repurposing of land. So it's sort of like, I just think it's a thing that's got to be looked at fully. I was very disturbed. Our electors all left the tenants with the impression they would support, if the tenants voted, they would support it. And I know there's going to be a lot of other factors as electors have to answer to as we go down the road with this. And I don't want to give tenants the false sense of that everything's just hunky-dory. That's how they left that meeting. They really did. So, and I've both gotten, I told Jeffrey this afternoon, I've gotten like, I was angry, I was furious, I was sleepless. And then I sort of now just sort of calm thinking about it. There's a lot of issues here that have to be sorted through. That's all. It's not just about a tenant vote.
And you know, the reality, Joe, is that renovating these buildings, I knew from the start, was probably not doable. It just wasn't going to happen. There's just plain too much to be done.
I disagree. This is about money. If the
No, but I'm just saying that the way it was framed, I don't think they really, you know, saw what was here. They just didn't see what was actually here.
I think NYCHA horribly underfigured the cost, right, Jeffrey? They horribly underfigured it.
I mean, I think that was made, frankly, I should have, if I had, I guess I'm kind of surprised from the get-go, we thought 356 million was enough money, and that the developer came back with 450 million, and that was still enough.
No, because the fight, Jeffrey, was that NYCHA kept saying no, no, no on things. We, as the working group members, Mike was there, we pushed for more and more things to be included. And that's how we got to the 376 million. It started at like 320 or something. This was just, it was one of these crazy things that kept saying, here's our papers, here's what it cost, here's what it cost. I mean, we really pushed like devils on this to get it.
So I want to note that it's 8:45, and this was meant to be an informational and preliminary discussion. I want to make sure that folks didn't, Joe kept talking about how there'll be a public discussion. This is the start of a discussion, and that in no way, shape, or form was anybody saying there wouldn't be public discussion on this. What I want to make sure is that regardless of sort of what Mike shared tonight is one perspective, an important perspective from him as one of our neighbors in one of these developments. Important to consider and know that, but that they kind of need to figure out what their thoughts and plans are. And I want to say that, like, are we asking Essence and Related to come present to us? Are we asking the Tenants Association to come talk to us? If there's a next step here that we want to formalize, what is it? Because I'm very concerned about there being any implication of the community board telling NYCHA tenants what to do. And so I just am throwing that out there for some recommendations, frankly. Paul?
Well, is there anything that can be done? Leslie's point about, an RFP went out, and that RFP is basically being ignored, and other developers came in with other pricing. Do we need to revisit the RFP, and should we make any statement about that?
I think we should be simpler. We should just ask. There was a discussion with elected officials and a few members of the board and the two tenant association reps, or three. We should ask them to come and do a presentation about the current thinking about the plan. That's it, and just start the conversation going. And it can be this version, that version, whatever it is. It should be tenant association who said they were very much in favor, the tenant presidents, and the developers. That's a normal thing to happen.
Jessica?
Yeah, I'm. If we were sitting together in person, someone would definitely kick me under the table for this. But I do wonder if there needs to be a recommendation that the working group be reconstituted to address some of these issues, because what you're describing, what I'm hearing is like there needs to be a place for all of the stakeholders to be brought back together and to ensure that backroom conversations aren't happening. And I think the working group was an attempt to do that. I know it was very time consuming and very challenging, but there inevitably are going to be people who are left out of a meeting or one presentation.
Eric Botcher recommended a slimmed down version of the working group to start just to discuss this. In other words, not to all 60 members, but
yeah,
like not all the citywide, whatever, a lesser group to start discussing it.
I think this is the start of the conversation. We're going to end it here, and expect updates and follow committee agendas accordingly. Thank you, everybody. Our esteemed district manager, your turn.
How do I follow that? All right, so very quickly, I'll be trying to be as quickly as possible. There is the draft full board agenda for next week's full board in your Dropbox. Please, please, please take a look at it. I am sure it's not complete, but do let us know if there's something missing or we need to add something. Very quickly, District Attorney Alvin Bragg did confirm that he will be coming to present, so he will be our presenter. Our public hearing, I believe we're doing it on the Pier 94, to my knowledge at this point. So that's that. The committee schedule for March, the tentative committee schedule for March is also in draft form in your Dropbox. Please take a look at that and look at all of the committees and all of the proposed agenda items, so we're all on the same page. Besides that, sorry, Jeffrey, I'm doing you, Jeffrey. I can't find my tabs. Okay, March. For March, we are actually all meeting when we're supposed to be meeting. So that's lovely. And so there shouldn't be any committee changes, to my knowledge. So that's that. And the other thing I wanted to talk about just was the Summer Youth Employment Program. And so we have been contacted by the program. It happens every year. I think most of the people know about it. We are advocates of it, of course. ACES has done a lot of good work on it. And so they've contacted us about possibly having summer youth employees under Community Board 4 District Office. And so I'm talking to a community board that's worked with them in the past on Thursday to get a better sense of kind of how that works on just from an operational standpoint. But the way it really is, the only way it's going to work, in my opinion, is because it is over the summer, and that is our slowest period, is that we've got a project. And so we're always very good with project-based stuff. So I am throwing this out to all of the co-chairs. If there is a possible idea or project, survey, anything, from potholes to parks. I like that, from potholes to parks, and or anything along those lines. That, I think you have to remember, these are high school students, right? So there are some limits here as to what we can expect them to be able to do or put them in a situation. But if there are any of those projects that could possibly be helpful to your committees in any way, please think about it. Don't answer now. I don't want to hear it now unless you just email me with some ideas. And by emailing me with some ideas, that means you're also participating in helping me work this project out over the summer. That's
Jesse, does letter writing count?
Oh, I only wish. Yeah, so that's my other topic, I think. Let me just make sure I hit everything I said I would hit. And listen, office space is chugging along. We should have OMB approval of the new space by the end of this month, which is then going to start the actual ULURP for our new space. So we will be going through our own ULURP. We get to feel what it's like on the other side.
You just can't escape it. You just can't. It's like it's our stamp. It's our ULURP stamp across our foreheads.
Paul and JD, please be nice to us when we come in front of you.
Do we have to vote P&E on those though?
I don't even know how it's going to work. But it's a very truncated ULURP. It's a 30-day clock for everybody because it's a city-owned application with its property. So, but we will be going through ULURP. We will be presenting in front of Department of City Planning, and so doing the full thing. So be prepared for that. But that is all good news, and so I think that's all I've got to say.
Paul, is your hand up for something new? Yeah.
On committee schedules. I noticed that the 5-borough housing committee is presenting to HHHS, CHKLU, and CLU and that CHKLU doesn't have anything else on their agenda for that meeting. I'm wondering if Jessica and Kerry would want to be invited to attend Hell's Kitchen land use and do a joint meeting rather than having 3 meetings with 5 boroughs housing. So
Well, one thing I didn't put it on for housing, Joe. If that was your intention, you wanted it on housing as well? No,
I thought I
you
saw
just-
it on, I thought I saw it on housing
Yeah,
just
I
now.
think we walked away from that briefing to say that it was going to be on both the land use committees, just the land use committees. I will say right now, CHKLU has nothing else, but we all know that CHKLU will most likely have something else, and most likely LPC related. That always was what happens. As you remember, Paul, those the good old days of 1 week before the committee, we get a desperate land use a landmarks application running into our doors. I will say I did forward you the 5 borough housing folks are willing to come to both, but I did forward both to the land use co-chairs that, you know, his update on basically the progress on that and whether getting something in time for the budget is a reality and or whether it's going to be the work that would entail be worth it for all of that. So I would just, the co-chairs of the land use committees could take a look at that email, please, and let me know. So that would be great.
We can talk offline, Paul, too.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Okay, any other new or old business? Thank you. So with that, I appreciate everybody's time, diligence, and discussion this evening, and I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night.